Very welcome to Stora Aktiedagen in Stockholm. My name is Lars Håkansson and I'm working for the Swedish Shareholders Association. And our first speaker will be Nikolai Sørensen from the company called Orexo. Very welcome, Nikolai, and please do your presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this event. I'm going to present Orexo to you, a company that I believe a lot of you recognize as a specialty pharmaceutical company or even as a drug delivery company developing new pharmaceuticals. What I'm going to present is the transformation that we have started moving into a completely new and quite exciting space called digital therapies, and also how we're still staying in our roots and developing some quite new and innovative new products, and specifically one for opioid rescue medication that I would spend a little more time on discussing. So a short introduction to the company. Orexo is, as I said, is a pharmaceutical company. Our roots is in drug delivery. We have developed several different products that have been commercialized all over the world. Orexo has been part of that approval process in many different geographies. And I think anyone who works with pharmaceuticals will know that that is a specific skill. How do you get a product approved? And this is something that I take a lot of pride in, that Orexo has a good track record in understanding what's needed from the authorities. The space where we focus today is an area which unfortunately due to the pandemic is growing dramatically. It's called mental illness. And under mental illness, you find diseases like addiction for opioids, alcohol misuse, anxiety, depression, and so forth. We see this as an area where there's a significant opportunity both to address some very specific needs through medications, new pharmaceuticals, but also an area where digital therapies, I think, is perfectly fit to solve some of the issues we have in this space. So where we're focusing at the moment is working in digital therapies, a completely new space, but also developing new pharma products, which are addressing very specific needs that we have identified in this space. One thing that makes Orexo unique compared to a lot of other companies is that we have a quite healthy revenues of north of 700 million. For the last 12 months, we have a positive EBITDA. I will say that Q3 and this year we were negative, but that's solely due to the investments we are doing in our new pharma products and in our digital therapies. Should we go back to Orexo a year ago, we would still have a positive EBITDA in the company. But right now we are investing in building two new, quite exciting opportunities. As you can see, we have Orexo transformation really started in 2012 when we were a drug delivery company. Then we launched our first product in the US in 2013. We made the company profitable in 2016, and since then we have basically grown the cash flow contribution in the company. We have used this cash now to acquire rights to some new digital therapies and to develop our pharma pipeline, as I said. And the logic that we're moving from is basically standing where we are in drug addiction, opioid addiction, which is a significant issue which is growing very fast in the US at the moment. We've been looking, where do we have overlaps? What is it that we can use based on the strengths we have in that space? And we find in mental illness, there are a lot of people who are suffering from opioid addiction, who are also suffering from alcohol misuse and depression, anxiety, and other areas. Just looking at these other mental illnesses, you'll see that, for example, in the US, 16.6 million Americans are what you would classify as heavy alcohol users, and this was before the pandemic. You have a vast amount of people who are dying every year from alcohol misuse in the US, and the cost associated with this is tremendous. Depression is another area where we have very good pharmaceuticals, but where the pharmaceutical is just one end of the treatment. The access to the psychotherapies is something that is definitely a bottleneck, both in the US but also globally. And this is an area where we believe, and there is a pretty good track record to show that digital therapies is a very good complement and could even, for some patients who can't get access to therapies, it is even a very strong self-standing treatment of depression. The strategy, as I said, from Orexo is we basically, based on the revenues we're getting from Zubsolv, we have maintained the profitability in Zubsolv. We actually increased our US pharma profitability up to about 50%. We have taken that profit that we get from Zubsolv to broaden our portfolio. First, going into digital therapies, where we have launched our first products now during the summer. We're taking a very stepwise approach, but we're right now building up basically our digital therapies in collaboration with our customers. And we are launching some new pharmaceutical products. We're getting ready to launch new pharmaceutical products from our own pharma pipeline. So building from where we stand strong with Zubsolv, with good revenue, good profitability, we're investing into digital therapies, but we also continue to develop some quite exciting pharmaceutical products. A little more of our digital therapies. So what is it that we believe in? In my world, we see that in the healthcare sector, taking a little more helicopter perspective, we have a situation where we have a scarce resource of qualified physicians. We have become pretty good in the pharmaceutical industry to build at scale, developing large pharmaceuticals which are replacing what before was done by pharmacists and now standardized, manufactured by pharmaceutical companies. But the big bottleneck and the big cost driver in the healthcare sector is really the use of physicians, therapists, nurses, and so forth. And here is an area where we just started to see how digital solutions can actually replace some or make that interaction with your healthcare provider more efficient by use of digital therapies. I think the pandemic has created a leapfrog in the development. So basically, I've seen analysts that believe in a few months, we're taking a 5-year step ahead in the adoption of these new digital health solutions. And I'm quite certain that if we're looking a few years ahead, digital health will be an integrated part of any kind of healthcare delivery. If you're going to a doctor in 10 years, I'm absolutely certain you will have an element of digital health, whether it's in the diagnostic phase, whether it's during the meeting with the doctor, or it's the follow-up of the treatment. There will be that digital health space. And this is the reason why we think this is a super exciting area for Orexo to enter, basically entering into a segment of the healthcare world where we believe digital healthcare has most clinical evidence that it works, and where we think it's the fastest opportunity to adoption, and that is within mental health, where you can basically complement the use of psychotherapy with a human and do some of that using a computer instead. And this is where our digital therapies are coming in. They're basically cognitive behavioral therapy combined with other exercises for depression, for alcohol misuse, and soon also for opioid addiction. So the strategy we have is we have worked together with a German company, Gaia AG. Gaia is a quite big company, one of the pioneers in digital health. They have 180 people working in Gaia at the moment. A lot of them with development, also quite a lot of them are psychotherapists or psychologists, physicians, psychiatrists, who are basically experts in how to develop these digital therapies. However, when we look at the digital health market, we are a strong believer that one of the important steps in this digital health market is to create the platform for distribution, payment, reimbursement from insurance companies. And we've invested a lot of money during the last half year to build a scalable model where we can basically help the patient to get access to their product. We can get patients to get payment or get paid from the insurance companies, and we can distribute the model. And in parallel, we have built a data center, so we basically collect anonymous outcome data for the patients so we can follow the progress, which we also believe is a big opportunity in the future, basically the power of big data. The strategy for this platform is now to expand. So while we're working to starting the real commercialization of the Deprexis and Vorvida and soon also Modia, we are now looking for other products where we think that they can benefit from using the same platform, which we deliberately have built into scale so it can be used for other products. And we've already, for example, by announcing a competition together with a company called LifeBulb, we had a prize of $25,000 to entrepreneurs who had innovative digital health solutions within mental illness. We got quite a lot of applications, and based on these applications, we now have a pretty good platform to start our business development efforts to find potential partners, whether it's acquisition partners, distribution partners, or how we'll see the partnership is something that will emerge. But we are building basically a position for Orexo to sit in the middle of this value chain between the development of these new digital therapies and the patient. However, while we are entering this business, I also have to say we are coming in with something that is a disruptive technology. It is something that doesn't really exist as an integrated part of healthcare today. There's no given pathway for reimbursement. There's no given pathway for how it should be used in the healthcare by the healthcare providers. And there's still some work about what kind of pricing model are we looking at? Is it the app pricing where you basically add on, you get paid for the functionality that you add on to the solution, or are we looking at a more insurance-based pricing model? We are a strong believer that the insurance-based pricing model is the one that will prevail and the one that gives us an opportunity to actually get paid for the benefits that we're creating. And therefore, it takes a little longer than should we have a low price and distributed broadly. We have set up a price that we believe is reasonable from an insurance company. And that also means that we need to build these infrastructure to get paid. But again, I believe that's actually a strength for the future because this is creating a platform where we can scale up and add on more solutions quite easily to the same platform for other companies. But it is something that is still early stage. While I'm certain in 5 years this will be a very established business, we are one of the pioneers in this area. Today we have 3 digital therapies, Deprexis, Vorvida, and Modia. Deprexis is for treatment of symptoms of depression, Vorvida is for reduction of troublesome drinking patterns, and Modia is for treatment of opioid use disorder. Modia is something that we see could very nicely fit together with Zubsolv as it is based to be used together with buprenorphine. However, we don't see this as a product that only should be used with Zubsolv. It is for all buprenorphine treatments. All of these products, we believe, have a sales potential of around 200 million. And based on the feedback we have seen in the market, we believe this to be the truth. There is a significant need in the market when we have passed the hurdles of getting the reimbursement models established. So with a little patience, I'm pretty sure these opportunities by far exceed what we have seen in our pharmaceutical pipeline and from Zubsolv, for example. So why do we believe that this will work? Because there is a clinical evidence behind the digital therapies that is absolutely comparable to pharmaceutical. Here's one example. It's from Deprexis, one of the world's most researched digital therapies. It's 12 different clinical trials which have been published in peer-reviewed journals. What you should look at is what's called HG. If you are north of 0.3, you have a strong effect. If you're north of 0.5, it's a very strong effect. If you get one of some of the studies up to 0.8, it's a very, very strong effect. And most of these studies show an effect which is absolutely comparable and even stronger than some of the pharmaceuticals that are used today for treatment of depression. These different studies are different combinations, both standalone use of Deprexis without any other use of treatment and also combination with existing treatment. We strongly believe that the best use of Deprexis and other digital therapy is rather than being a standalone treatment, will be a complement to your existing treatment pathway. And that makes sense from an Orexo perspective because where we have our field force is basically selling to the physicians, we have a network already there that we can leverage to distribute these solutions and get it integrated into the existing healthcare rather than being a separate app that you, for example, can download on App Store and where you have no interaction with the healthcare system. A little about our pharma products. So I'm just focusing on the 2 main value driver. One is Zubsolv. Zubsolv has been on the market since 2013. It's a Zubsolv is a treatment of opioid dependence, a buprenorphine naloxone product. It's a market that has a tremendous growth at the moment. It's driven by 2 things. First, an underlying growth in the market, which we've seen the last several years. But we've seen that during COVID-19, the number of relapse have increased tremendously. So that leads to the actual growth this year is expected to be the highest ever in this category. However, when we break down the growth, the majority of the growth is within Medicaid. And that's driven by 2 things. First of all, the underlying demand, the relapse of opioid dependence. The other part is that the commercial segment, people with a private health insurance, which in the US normally gets through your employer. When we see unemployment in the US spiking. We see a lot of people with mental disorders, for example, opioid use disorder, are the first people to lose their job. And therefore, we see that this transferring of people from private health insurance to Medicaid, and the private health insurance market in the US for the first time since we launched in 2013 is actually right now declining quarter over quarter, which for Zubsolv is a little unfortunate because this is really where we have our stronghold. We have 99% of the people with a private health insurance have access to Zubsolv and getting reimbursed from Zubsolv. But when that market is declining, it's a little difficult for us to grow because we don't have the same position within Medicaid. However, when you look at Zubsolv sales, you should note that the sole explanation why Zubsolv sales have declined somewhat from last year is due to the two large insurance companies, United Healthcare and Humana, decided to add generic products to their formularies. So before that, they were only reimbursing Zubsolv, but from first half of last year, they started to reimburse generic products, competitors to the branded product called Suboxone. And that is basically explaining the decline. If we look at the market where we are reimbursed and there are no changes have been made, we actually see that we're growing compared to last year. And during the pandemic, we managed to be stable despite the commercial segment going down. We have then grown in the Medicaid part of this market, which is compensating for the decline in the open segment or the privately health insurance segment. The interesting part about that is that I'm absolutely certain now when we are getting closer to a vaccine for COVID-19, the unemployment in the US will not stay at the levels we're seeing right now. It actually improved during Q3. And when we get into a post-COVID-19, when the vaccines are out there, I'm absolutely certain that the current unemployment data numbers will not stay, which would be a great growth opportunity for Zubsolv. And in that environment, I'm quite proud to say that Zubsolv is increasing and strengthening its market access. We now are made the exclusive branded product by Express Scripts and Cigna on the 2021 formulary. And with that, we will be the only branded product which are preferred and reimbursed by the top 3 PBMs in the US, covering 60% of the commercial or private health insurance market, together with generics, but there will not be any other branded products. OX124. I think this is an underestimated and a little ignored opportunity in our pipeline. If you look at OX124, it has been designed to manage overdoses with fentanyl. And if you look in the US, as we're seeing the growth of people misusing opioids, we're also seeing the number of people dying from overdose is trending towards higher than 76,000, which would be 13% higher than the last number. This is the highest number ever in death of overdose in the US. And if we look at what's driving that is overdose by fentanyl. Here we have the number 1 brand in the US, accounting, I believe, for nearly 80% of the market, is Narcan. Narcan is expected to sales for this year is expected around $300 million. But Narcan is really not strong enough for a lot of the fentanyl overdose. You need several dosages of Narcan before you can reverse an overdose with fentanyl. And that's where OX124 come in. We have basically designed OX124 to be a product to treat opioid overdose. And if you look at our clinical data from the first study, which is for 30 healthy volunteers, you'll see the red curve is OX124, the blue curve is Narcan. OX124, as you can see, has a much higher plasma concentration, much faster and longer lasting than Narcan. And that's exactly what you need for fentanyl overdose. So already now in our first clinical trial, we have shown very good data. The data here is so strong that we will jump straight to our last and final pivotal trial during Q2 next year. So you could say this product is actually now entering what we would say a phase 3. But as the next clinical trial is basically the same as we already have done, and we need to show data like this, we feel quite comfortable that we have a product that from a clinical perspective, we meet the required endpoint from FDA. A little short about our financial situation. As you noticed, as already said, we have a little more than 700 million in sales. Last 12 months, we positive EBITDA. However, we do see that the last quarter was negative due to investments in digital health and in our pipeline of OX124. Our US pharma continues to show very strong EBIT profitability. We have about 50% EBIT margin in the US. And while we've seen a decline in the sales, we think that decline would slowly pays off. And when we see unemployment data in the US go down, that will have a positive effect on Zubsolv in the future. We're doing this from a position of strength. We have very strong cash position. Net cash position is nearly 400 million. And what you should note here is that the negative numbers in both group and EBITDA is to a large degree explained by Abstral. Abstral is a pain product that was generating about 120 million Swedish kronor in royalty income. Some of that will stay, but nearly a little more than 80 million of that disappeared as the product was, the partnership we had expired by New Year between 19 and 20. So this development is fully expected, and of course royalties is hitting much harder on EBITDA than it is on the top line. Finally, I just noticed that we, for full transparency, we have two legal processes. One of them is not really moving. That is that we received a subpoena from the US authorities in July this year. We have not heard from them since then, so we don't know what this will end up. We don't know what they're looking at. We have worked with a lawyer to go through all of our promotional material, and we have not found any reason that we should be in problem with due to how we have commercialized Zubsolv. We also have a generic process with Sun Pharmaceuticals. We've been in that before. We have patents that have been validated on a federal level, so we feel quite comfortable that we can fight this off also and defend Zubsolv's exclusivity. And these generic patent processes is simply a part of doing business in the US. I feel quite comfortable that we have a strong patent situation for Zubsolv. So right now, this is not keeping me awake at night for sure. With that, I'll just finalize summing up why I believe that Orexo is an exciting company. We are moving into mental illness. It's an area which unfortunately is accelerated by the COVID-19, but even before COVID-19 was an area with significant unmet need. We're moving into digital therapies, an area which I at least, and I hope that a lot of you share, is an area where we'll see tremendous growth in the future. We are learning a lot, and we're definitely one of the pioneers in this space at the moment. And then we have a pipeline of a pharma product, for example, OX124, which I really think is addressing a big need in the US, and where we clinically have shown in our first clinical trial a significant differentiation to the market leader, which has a turnover of about $300 million this year. With that, I will open up for questions, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Nikolaj Sørensen, for a nice presentation. I would like to ask you, my first question is, how affected are your company on the ongoing pandemic?
So we have a couple of things that affects us. I did say early this year that if the pandemic was over by May, then we wouldn't be affected from a sales perspective. But here we are in December, and I think the pandemic is raging harder than ever. So when we look from our field force, it is difficult for the field force to meet the physician in the same frequency and with the same quality of the sales calls as we had before the pandemic. We have reacted by lowering, when we have vacancies, we don't backfill them in the field force. And we have reduced our expenses in marketing, but that is something where, as long as the pandemic go on and we have restrictions, it's of course very difficult to use the normal sales channels. When it comes to our R&D, it's not as impacted, but it does have some effect because we, for example, Zubsolv for Europe, we have it approved in Europe, but we need to have a supply chain, and our packaging partner has not been able to get an audit by the authorities due to the pandemic in the country where they are. The same goes for our other pipeline project or development projects. It's a little difficult for our experts from Orexo, or not to say impossible for them to travel. And we would normally have our Orexo employees sitting together with our manufacturing partners, developing the first batches of the product, and we can't do that right now, which is a complicating factor. But I think this use of videos is overcoming a lot of that.
Are there any advantages from the pandemic in your business, would you say?
So it's very cynical to say that the pandemic is helping us, and I think right now it's not. It is lowering the sales for Zubsolv, I'm quite certain about that. But if you look long term, we're seeing the need for our product pipeline, and that goes both for our pharma but also for our digital therapies, is going to be much higher due to the pandemic. If you look at the adoption of digital therapies and digital health, I saw an analyst who said this was jumped 5 years ahead due to the pandemic. So really the use of telemedicine, use of different digital instruments have really accelerated quite hard due to the pandemic. And that will, of course, help our digital therapies. At the same time, short term, it is a barrier because we can't meet people in the same way as we could before. And we quite often have situations, for example, in the US now, when we're building digital therapies, where meetings are cancelled or postponed because the person on the other end has been sick with corona or has people in their family who's been sick with corona. And that, of course, is something that delays a lot of processes compared to normal.
Okay. You have invested heavily in digital therapies with the intention of becoming a leader in the field. When do you expect sales to get started?
We see some first relatively low sales at the moment, which is a little unexpected because the sales channel at the moment is primarily people who are buying for cash. So they need to buy for $750. Since yesterday, we have now an opportunity that people can pay that every month instead of one time. So that we think will be important for people who's using cash. But we do believe the large generator of sales is coming through reimbursement, whether that's from employers, insurance companies, or healthcare providers. That would be the big trigger. And there we have built, the system is basically something we're building, and now we're testing it together with different smaller group of patients and physicians. We're testing our different reimbursement models to be sure that it works. So before we're rolling it out broadly, we want to be sure that the money is actually going in where they should come in, and they come in at the pace that we are expecting. So right now we're running a lot of pilots, which is also, some of them will generate a little sales, but I don't think that, I know there will not be any material sales in 2020. But when we look at 2021, that's when we believe the sales will start building. But again, this is a new space. So before we go up to the potential, it will take some years before the full health market in the US is ready to roll out digital therapies on a broad scale. But we're working on so many fronts at the moment, and I'm pretty sure that we will soon start to see some of them generate a little more material sales than what we're seeing at the moment.
Interesting. Since 2016, you are one of few Swedish pharmaceutical companies that make a profit. The investments in digital therapies have made you show red numbers. Again, when do you think Orexo can become a company that makes money and shows black figures? So
I will first say, if I'm going back to when we showed black numbers last year, for example, the same business that showed black numbers last year would also show black numbers this year. So as you said, the reason why we're showing red numbers in Q3 is that we were investing quite heavily in not only digital therapies, but also in development of OX124. That also means that we have the opportunity to basically break and delay some of the development, and we can move back to what you would say black numbers. However, that would be foregoing a lot of growth opportunities. And for me, really, as long as I see an opportunity for us to grow the business, if that means that we have to invest for another quarter, I will not forego that growth opportunity just to meet a profitability target for one specific quarter. I think we're now entering into a space where if we see the growth that we know that will be there, if we see that start to materialize already next year, we will continue to invest. If we see that it takes longer time, we have the ability to pull down a lot of these investments because it's really variable cost. It's cost of building up a system. OX124 is a clinical trial that we're going to run next year. That's something that is a one-time effect. But if you look at the core cost of running Orexo, we could turn the company profitable tomorrow, should we want to do that. But I hope that all of our investors share the opportunity that we see in front of us and find this is the right time to invest rather than to pull back and just be happy with what we have already. I think there is so much growth that we could take part of, that this is a good time to invest.
Is that why you have so much cash also?
No, it has been part of the strategy for the last years is basically we have seen that when we saw a growth opportunity, we want to be able to invest in that growth opportunity. And as people who followed us would have seen, we have invested about 300 million already for the last 12 months. Most of that has gone into digital therapies. So we are we have built a cash position to be able to invest when we have that without having to go and ask our shareholders for more money. And I feel that we have a very strong cash position right now, and this basically enables us to capture this opportunity. And if you compare to some of the other digital therapy companies, I just saw yesterday one of the more prominent names in the US just made a cash raise of $30 million. And if you look at our cash, we have about $60 million on our bank account. So we are much better capitalized than most of these digital health companies. And I think this is important right now, where we in the pharma world is a pretty small fish. In the digital health space, we're a pretty strong company from a financial perspective, and that opens up a lot of opportunity for us.
Okay, my last question will be, if you look 5 years from now, what do you see then regarding to Orexo?
If our plans for digital therapies if they materialize in that 5-year period, which is definitely our plans that they should be, we will be more of a digital therapy and digital health company. But I also see that the pharma part is a strong foundation for us, and in particular OX124 and the patent portfolio that we're creating around that technology is opening up new opportunities for Orexo. So I think we will have more two distinct business areas in a 5-year period. But from where we are right now, I think the digital therapy part would be the bigger one of the two, whereas today is the other way around.
Thank you very much, Nikolai Sorenson, for doing this presentation for us, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.